My family saw me as a stain, a secret to be hidden. In opulent drawing rooms, under cold gazes, I, with my vibrant red hair, was the shame that needed to vanish. I was given away, relegated, cast into the confines of a world I never imagined, the stables, away from everything I knew. My punishment? A simple man whom they barely dared to look at, yet he saw something beyond my disgrace. While the world turned its back on me, he, the stable boy, served me tea every night, a quiet ritual in my new lonely existence. Without words, just the calm, unwavering presence of someone who listened to what no one else could bear, accepting my truth. They called him rude, unworthy, but it was his voice, the calmest I'd ever heard, that whispered a truth to me, shattering every preconception, that my voice, even when I cried, was beautiful. In that cold, forgotten place, amidst the scent of hay and hidden books, I found something no ball, title, or expensive dress had ever given me: respect. It was there, in simplicity, that I truly understood what it meant to be loved, without demands, without shame, without needing to prove anything at all. This is the story of how a punishment became the greatest gift, of how I, a beautiful redhead, found a queen where there was only an outcast, and of an unexpected love that defied all the rigid rules of the Victorian era. In the gilded cages of Victorian society, where reputations were fragile as spun glass and whispered secrets held the power of execution, a young lady of unparalleled beauty, with a cascade of fiery red hair that seemed to defy the somber world around her, found herself thrust into an abyss of social ruin. Her very presence, once a celebrated beacon in the city's most exclusive ballrooms, now cast a long, dark shadow of shame upon her esteemed family. Every rustle of silk, every hushed conversation, every averted gaze in the opulent drawing rooms of their grand Mayfair estate became a fresh wound, a searing reminder of her supposed transgression. Her youthful beauty, which should have been her greatest asset, was now viewed as a tragic flaw, stained by an unnamed scandal that clung to her like a shroud, suffocating her spirit. Before we delve deeper into this tale of an unexpected sanctuary, a quiet plea to those of you who find solace and intrigue in the untold stories of resilience, of love found in the unlikeliest of places. Statistics revealed that a remarkable 90% of you who graciously lend your ear to these forgotten whispers are not yet subscribed to our channel. Your support, your decision to join our growing family, allows us to continue unearthing these hidden gems of history, these narratives of strength and redemption, ensuring that such profound journeys of the heart are never lost to the annals of time. Please consider becoming a part of our community. Your subscription means the world to us. The weight of societal condemnation pressed down upon her, a constant crushing burden that stole the light from her vibrant eyes. She was Lady Eleanor, though the title now felt like a cruel jest, a vestige of a life abruptly severed. Her days, once filled with the gentle hum of piano lessons, the soft rustle of expensive fabrics chosen by her lady's maid, and the polite chatter of endless social calls, were now consumed by a suffocating silence. Her family, rigid in their adherence to Victorian propriety, could not bear the stain she represented. Her mother, whose once doting eyes now held a distant coolness, would avoid her gaze across the breakfast table, engrossed instead in the rustle of the morning paper. Her father, a man of formidable presence in society, treated her with a chilling formality, his voice devoid of paternal warmth, each interaction a stark reminder of her fallen status. The grand staircase, once a stage for her youthful grace in flowing gowns, became a somber ascent, each step echoing her isolation. She would wander through the meticulously manicured gardens, their blooming perfection a cruel mockery of her own blighted existence. The fragrant roses and blossoming wisteria offering no comfort, only amplifying the stark contrast between their vibrant life and her internal decay. Her elegant gowns, once chosen with such care for evening soirees, now felt heavy and cumbersome, symbolic of the chains that bound her. Even her striking red hair, a fiery crown that had once drawn admiring glances, now felt like a mark, a beacon for judgmental whispers. She spent hours in her opulent yet desolate chamber, gazing out of the tall windows at the world that had cast her out. The intricate lace curtains offering no real privacy, only a veiled separation from a life that was no longer hers. The silence of the mansion was punctuated only by the distant clatter of servants, a world moving on without her, indifferent to her plight. The final decree came on a dreary afternoon, the sky outside mirroring the gloom within her soul. Her father, seated rigidly in his study, the rich scent of leather and old books filling the air, delivered the sentence with a cold precision that pierced her already fragile heart. The words, "You will be sent to the stables," fell upon her ears like stones, each syllable a blow. The stables? The very antithesis of her sheltered, refined existence. It was not merely a relocation, it was an act of deliberate degradation, a public shaming cloaked in the guise of a practical solution. The stable boy, the man to whom she would be given, was described with a disdain that painted him as little more than an animal himself, a rough, uncultured brute, utterly unworthy of even a glance from a lady of her standing. The implications were clear. She was no longer deemed worthy of her rightful place, her very essence reduced to something that could be managed by the lowest servant on the estate. Her porcelain complexion paled further at the thought, her delicate hands clenching involuntarily at her sides. This was not merely a shift in residence, it was a profound stripping away of identity, a forced descent from the dizzying heights of Victorian aristocracy to the earthy, practical world of manual labor and horses. The image of her former life, with its glittering chandeliers and polite conversation, shattered, replaced by the stark reality of her new, ignominious fate. The carriage ride to her new home was a journey not just across the estate, but across the chasm of her very existence. The opulent carriage, usually reserved for visits to grand country estates or leisurely drives through Hyde Park, now felt like a tumbril carrying her to a symbolic execution. Each turn of the wheels brought her further from the manicured lawns and stately oaks that defined her past, deeper into the less refined, utilitarian sections of the sprawling property. The air changed, growing heavier with the scent of damp earth, hay, and the distinctive musky aroma of horses. Through the carriage window, her reflection, framed by her now slightly disheveled red hair, seemed ghostly, a fading image of the woman she once was. Her eyes, usually sparkling with youthful curiosity, were now dulled by apprehension and despair, scanning the unfamiliar landscape with a growing sense of dread. The imposing facade of the main house slowly receded from view, its elegant lines replaced by the sturdy, practical structures of outbuildings, sheds, and finally, the long, low outline of the stables. This was not just a physical transition, it was a psychological descent, stripping away the layers of privilege and protection she had always known. The sound of hoofs clattering on the gravel approach road grew louder, the whinny of a distant horse piercing the silence of her internal turmoil. Her heart, already heavy with sorrow, now beat with a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drum solo of fear in the face of her unknown future. The stables, when she finally disembarked, were a stark reality. The air, thick with the earthy scent of straw, horse manure, and old leather, assaulted her senses, a potent reminder of the world she had entered. The grand, airy spaces of her former home were replaced by dark, cavernous interiors, punctuated by wooden stalls and the occasional snort or stomp of a horse. The light was dim,
filtering through dusty windows, creating long shadows that danced across the cobbled floor. Her elegant, though now simple, traveling gown felt utterly out of place amidst the rough-hewn beams and practical implements. This was a place of utility, of honest labor, of life stripped bare of pretense, everything her former world was not. Her gaze, hesitant and uncertain, swept across the bustling activity. Stable hands, rough-looking men with calloused hands and faces weathered by sun and wind, moved with an easy competence she found alien. It was amidst this unfamiliarity that her eyes settled upon him, the man to whom she had been relegated. He was a figure of quiet strength, broad-shouldered, with hands that moved with practiced ease as he tended to a large dark mare. His attire was simple, a sturdy linen shirt, a leather apron, and practical boots, utterly devoid of the elaborate embellishments of the gentleman she knew. His hair was dark, a contrast to her own vibrant red hair, and slightly unkempt, suggesting a life lived under the open sky, far from the confining wigs and pomades of society. He did not immediately notice her, his focus entirely on the animal before him, a singular devotion that struck her as profoundly unusual. He was simply performing his duty, yet there was an undeniable authority in his quiet demeanor, a self-possession that intrigued and unnerved her simultaneously. The chasm between their worlds was vast, a social abyss seemingly impossible to bridge, and yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of something akin to curiosity stirred within her, a tiny spark in the profound darkness of her despair. She had been exiled to the stables, given to this simple man, and the future, though terrifying, now held an unforeseen, bewildering uncertainty.
The initial days in the stables were a bewildering blur of unfamiliar sights and sounds, a stark contrast to the cushioned existence Lady Eleanor had known. The cacophony of snorts, whinnies, and the rhythmic thump of hooves against straw filled the air, replacing the delicate tinkling of teacups and the hushed whispers of drawing-room gossip. Her elegant fingers, accustomed to the soft touch of embroidery silks and the smooth coolness of piano keys, now found themselves grappling with coarse fabrics and the rough texture of the wooden benches in her small, Spartan living quarters, adjacent to the main stable block. Her room, though clean, was devoid of the luxurious adornments she had once taken for granted. No velvet drapes, no ornate vanity table, no plush carpets to sink her feet into. Instead, a simple iron bed, a worn wooden chest, and a plain washstand constituted her entire world. The lack of mirrors was perhaps a mercy, sparing her the reflection of a life that had fractured beyond recognition. Yet even in this unvarnished reality, her vibrant red hair, often escaping its simple pins, seemed to glow with an intrinsic fire that refused to be extinguished, a defiant splash of color in her muted existence. She spent her days in a quiet solitude, often observing the stable hands from a discreet distance, trying to decipher the rhythms of this new world. They were men of practicality, their movements economical and purposeful, unlike the idle chatter and contrived gestures of the gentleman who had once filled her social calendar. The head stable boy, Mr. Davies, the very man to whom she had been relegated, was a constant, if distant, presence. He moved with an innate grace, his large frame belying a surprising gentleness as he groomed the horses or mended tack. He rarely spoke to her, beyond a polite, almost formal nod of acknowledgement when their paths briefly crossed. This silence, initially unsettling, began to feel less like indifference and more like a curious form of respect. There were no judgmental glances, no whispered accusations, only the quiet acceptance of her presence, however unusual it might be. This was a stark departure from the suffocating judgment she had endured in her former life, and though she barely dared to acknowledge it, A faint seed of relief began to sprout in the barren landscape of her heart. The sheer ordinarity of the stable routine, the predictable rhythm of feeding, grooming, and mucking out, offered a strange kind of comfort, a stability that had been utterly absent from her recent tumultuous past. She watched him work, his strong hands expertly braiding a horse's mane, the muscles in his forearms flexing under his simple shirt, and found herself captivated by the quiet dignity in every action. His dark, somewhat unruly hair seemed to perfectly suit his practical, unassuming nature, a stark contrast to the overly styled coiffures of society men. One evening, as the last rays of the sun painted the stable yard in hues of orange and purple, casting long, dramatic shadows, Eleanor found herself sketching absently in a small notebook she had managed to bring with her. It was a habit from her childhood, a quiet escape, and she found solace in the delicate lines and shading. The subject of her current sketch was one of the majestic horses, its powerful form captured with surprising skill. She had not noticed Mr. Davies' approach until a shadow fell across her page. Her hand froze, her heart leaping with a sudden, unbidden anxiety. She quickly tried to close the notebook, a reflex born from years of concealing her inner life from prying eyes. But his hand, large and calloused, yet surprisingly gentle, rested briefly on hers, preventing her. "Don't hide it, milady." His voice was deep, a low rumble, devoid of any hint of surprise or judgment, merely a quiet observation. He glanced at the sketch, his eyes, the color of rich earth, holding a calm admiration. "That's a good likeness of old Bess." His words were few, but they carried a weight of sincerity she hadn't encountered in what felt like an eternity. Then he simply continued on his way, leaving behind a lingering sense of quiet affirmation. It was a small moment, easily overlooked, yet it resonated deeply within her, a tiny tremor in the carefully constructed walls of her despair. No one in her former life had ever truly seen her artistic pursuits, dismissing them as mere feminine pastimes. He had seen it, and approved. From that day forward, a subtle shift occurred. Mr. Davies, or Thomas as she learned his first name through overheard conversations with other stable hands, began a quiet ritual. Each evening, just as twilight deepened and the last chores were done, he would appear at the doorway of her modest room, a simple wooden tray in his hands. Upon it sat a single, steaming cup of tea, perhaps a humble biscuit or a slice of plain bread. He would place it silently on her small table, never lingering, never intruding, merely offering this small, consistent gesture of care. Sometimes he would pause, his gaze falling on the book she was reading or the half-finished sketch on her lap. There were no grand pronouncements, no declarations of sympathy. He simply was there, a steady, dependable presence in her chaotic world. These moments, initially awkward, transformed into something she unconsciously began to anticipate, a small anchor in the vast sea of her loneliness. The tea itself, simple and unadorned, became a symbol of his quiet attentiveness. It was not the fine Darjeeling served in her family's drawing room, but a robust, honest brew that warmed her hands and, more importantly, her spirit. In his presence, even in his silence, there was an absence of judgment that felt like the purest form of compassion. Her red hair, often loose around her shoulders as she relaxed in her humble room, seemed to glim a little brighter during these quiet evenings. She began to observe him more closely, not as a symbol of her disgrace, but as a man of quiet strength and profound capability. His interaction with the horses was a revelation. He spoke to them in low, soothing tones, understanding their moods, anticipating their needs. There was a genuine affection in his touch, a deep respect for the magnificent creatures in his care. She witnessed him patiently working with a skittish young foal, his calm demeanor and steady hands transforming its fear into trust. She saw him meticulously clean and oil the intricate leather harnesses, each piece treated with reverence. He was a master of his craft, his movements efficient and almost artistic in their precision. This quiet dedication, this honest labor, stood in stark contrast to the superficiality and idleness that had defined much of her former existence. She realized that the simplicity they had scorned in him was in fact a profound depth, an integrity she rarely encountered in the gilded cages of high society. His hands, rough from toil, were more capable and comforting than any manicured hand that had ever offered her superficial pleasantries. His worn, practical clothes, far from being a mark of inferiority, spoke of a life lived with purpose and genuine engagement with the world. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a fragile sense of peace began to settle over Lady Eleanor. The raw edges of her pain, though still present, started to soften. The constant thrum of anxiety that had lived beneath her skin began to subside, replaced by a quiet acceptance of her new reality. She found small comforts, the warmth of a horse's flank, the earthy scent of fresh hay, the reassuring rhythm of the stable's daily life. She even began to take small walks around the stable yard, breathing in the fresh country air, her red hair catching the breeze, no longer fearing judgmental eyes, for there were none. The stable hands, though distant, offered no scrutiny, only the occasional nod of acknowledgement. And then there was Thomas. His silent tea offerings continued, a steadfast beacon of his unspoken care. She sometimes found herself lingering by her doorway, just a moment longer, hoping for the glimpse of his tall frame approaching with the tray. There was no grand conversation, no dramatic confession, just the quiet, unwavering presence of a man who saw past her title, past her disgrace, to the person beneath. She knew not what the future held, but for the first time in months the chilling grip of utter despair began to loosen its hold. She was still an outcast in the eyes of her family and society, but here, in the heart of the stables, a tiny, improbable seed of hope had been planted, tended by silent kindness and genuine respect. Her existence had been deemed worthless, but Thomas, with his quiet dignity, was subtly, surely, teaching her otherwise. The quiet ritual of evening tea became the unexpected cornerstone of Lady Eleanor's days, a beacon of warmth in the cool, earthy confines of the stable. Each night, as the last light faded from the sky and the horses settled into their stalls, the soft glow of a lantern would precede Thomas's quiet arrival. He never spoke much, perhaps a murmured, "Good evening, my lady," or a simple nod as he placed the steaming mug on her small wooden table. Yet his presence was a language unto itself, a steadying force in her turbulent world. She began to anticipate these moments with a gentle yearning she hadn't known she possessed, counting the hours until the subtle scent of hay and horses, usually a reminder of her exile, now signified his approach. Her red hair, often loose and flowing around her shoulders in the privacy of her room, seemed to absorb the soft lamplight, creating a halo of warmth around her as she felt a rare sense of peace. She found herself, almost instinctively, beginning to help with small tasks around the stable, a shocking departure from her previous life of Gentile idleness. Initially, it was merely sorting clean rags, then carefully wiping down harnesses, her delicate fingers growing accustomed to the coarse textures and the faint, leathery scent. Thomas observed her efforts without comment, a silent acknowledgement that spurred her on. One crisp morning, she watched him struggle with a particularly stubborn latch on a stall door. Without a word, she stepped forward, her slender frame surprisingly agile, as she offered a steadying hand. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent an unexpected warmth through her, a sensation both foreign and strangely welcome. He looked at her then, his dark eyes holding a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by a subtle gratitude. A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared effort and quiet competence. It was a language far more profound than any drawing room pleasantry she had ever exchanged. Her fear of the stable environment gradually receded, replaced by a growing fascination with the magnificent creatures that filled its stalls. She spent hours observing them, learning their individual temperaments, their subtle cues. Thomas, sensing her burgeoning interest, began to offer quiet insights. He would point out the subtle shift in a horse's ear that indicated curiosity, or the slight flick of a tail that signaled contentment. He explained the intricate art of grooming, the importance of a firm yet gentle touch. He spoke of the horses not as mere beasts of burden, but as individuals with distinct personalities, much like people, deserving of respect and understanding. His voice, when he spoke of them, held a depth of affection that moved her. He never spoke down to her, never belittled her lack of knowledge. Instead, he treated her questions with the same earnest consideration he gave to the horse's needs, a stark contrast to the dismissive condescension she had endured from many a society gentleman. Her red hair, often escaping from a loose braid, would catch the sunlight filtering through the stable windows as she leaned in, completely engrossed in his quiet lessons. As the days turned into weeks, a quiet intimacy began to bloom between them, an unspoken bond forged in shared moments of silent work and understanding. She would sit on a bale of hay, sketching the horses or reading from a worn book, and he would simply be there, working nearby, his presence a comforting anchor. There were no grand pronouncements, no whispered confessions, merely the gradual intertwining of two disparate lives. He would ensure she had dry straw to sit upon or move a lantern closer if the light began to fade while she sketched. These small, thoughtful gestures spoke volumes, conveying a depth of care that transcended their social divide. Lady Eleanor, who had grown up in a world obsessed with appearances and titles, found herself increasingly drawn to the raw honesty of his character. There was no pretense about Thomas, no carefully constructed facade. He was simply himself, strong, kind, and profoundly genuine. One afternoon, a violent thunderstorm broke, trapping them both inside the stable. The sky outside turned a bruised purple, and the rain lashed against the roof with a deafening roar. Lightning cracked overhead, making the horses whinny nervously in their stalls. Lady Eleanor, despite her usual composure, felt a tremor of fear, a primal unease at the fury of the elements. She instinctively moved closer to the large, comforting presence of a gentle mare. Thomas, seeing her apprehension, walked over. He didn't speak, but his mere presence, solid and unwavering amidst the chaos, offered a silent reassurance. He began to stroke the mare's neck with long, calming movements, his hands conveying a quiet strength. "They sense it, the fear," he murmured, his voice low, almost swallowed by the storm's fury, yet it reached her, soothing her own agitated spirit. "But they know when they're safe, they trust." His words, ostensibly about the horses, felt deeply personal, a subtle message directed at her own anxieties. In that moment, surrounded by the storm's intensity, the divide between them seemed to vanish. He was not the stable boy, and she was not the disgraced lady. They were simply two souls, finding quiet solace in each other's steady presence, sharing a fragile moment of shared vulnerability. Her red hair, a vibrant contrast to the stormy skies outside, seemed to absorb the muted light within the stable, making her features stand out in sharp relief as she looked at him, truly saw him, beyond his station. The contrast between her past life and her present reality became increasingly stark, yet the balance of value had profoundly shifted. The suffocating formality of her family's drawing rooms, with their polite deceits and hidden judgments, now seemed utterly sterile compared to the genuine honesty of the stables. Here, there was no need for pretense. The horses cared not for her lineage or her disgrace, only for kindness and a steady hand. Thomas, too, offered an unvarnished truth, a steady presence that saw past the societal labels. She often thought of her beautiful gowns and intricate hairstyles, the hours spent in preparation for events that now seemed utterly meaningless. Here, in her simpler dresses, her red hair often escaping its pins, she felt more truly herself, more real than she ever had in the stifling confines of polite society. Her days now held a purpose she hadn't known she craved, a simple, tangible connection to the earth and to living creatures. She learned to mend a torn bridle, to carry water buckets without spilling, tasks that once would have been unthinkable for a lady of her stature. Each small accomplishment, each new skill acquired, brought a quiet satisfaction that far outweighed any fleeting pleasure derived from a successful social season. The respect he showed her was not born of her title, which he barely acknowledged, but of her inherent worth, of the resilience he saw blooming in her despite her circumstances. He never spoke of her past, never alluded to the scandal that had cast her out. He simply treated her as a person, a human being, deserving of dignity and consideration. This unconditional acceptance was a balm to her wounded spirit, slowly mending the deep fissures left by her family's rejection. She found herself confiding in him, not with grand revelations, but with small observations about the horses, about the changing seasons, about the quiet joys she was discovering in this unexpected life. He would listen, his dark eyes attentive, offering a rare, knowing smile or a thoughtful hum. His silences were not empty. They were filled with understanding, with an unspoken empathy that soothed her more than any torrent of well-meaning yet hollow words from her former acquaintances. Her red hair, a vibrant beacon of her spirit, seemed to shimmer with a newfound vibrancy in these moments of quiet connection. The cold formality of her past was slowly eroding, replaced by the gentle warmth of genuine human connection. It was a profound healing that began not in the grand halls of recovery, but in the humble, honest heart of the stable. Eleanor slowly came to realize that the punishment inflicted upon her was, ironically, the catalyst for her liberation. Stripped of her former life's superficialities, she was free to discover a deeper, more authentic self. The stables, once a symbol of her disgrace, had transformed into a sanctuary, a place where genuine respect and honest labor nurtured a fragile hope within her. Thomas, the stable boy, was no longer merely her keeper, but an unexpected guide to a world of real values, a silent teacher in the art of living with integrity. His steady presence, his quiet acts of kindness, and his unwavering acceptance were slowly dissolving the layers of fear and shame that had encrusted her heart. The vibrant red hair that had once made her stand out in society now seemed to blaze with a different kind of strength, a quiet power born of resilience and a burgeoning sense of self-worth. She had been exiled, but here, in this overlooked corner of the estate, she was, paradoxically, finding her true place, her true self, under the watchful, understanding gaze of a man who saw her not as a burden, but as a queen in disguise. This realization, blossoming like a secret garden in her soul, was a testament to the profound healing power of simple human kindness, a kindness that society, in its rigid adherence to convention, had utterly failed to provide. The chasm between their social stations remained, a stark, undeniable reality, yet within the quiet confines of the stable, a bridge of mutual respect and burgeoning affection was being forged, brick by silent brick, promising a future far removed from the expectations of her former world.
The passing weeks painted the stable yard with the shifting hues of late autumn, each falling leaf and crisp morning frost marking the deepening bond between Lady Eleanor and Thomas. The simple ritual of tea had expanded.
now often accompanied by quiet conversations that, while never delving into the explicit nature of her disgrace or his past, wove a tapestry of shared understanding. She found herself speaking of her newfound fascinations, the subtle wisdom in a horse's eyes, the intricate patterns of snowflakes on the stable roof, the quiet dignity of manual labor she had once disdained. Thomas, in turn, would respond not with grand pronouncements, but with thoughtful observations about the cycles of nature, the unspoken language of animals, or the honest satisfaction found in a day's work well done. His voice, a low, steady cadence, became a comforting melody in her often turbulent mind, a stark contrast to the clipped, precise tones of her former acquaintances. He never patronized her questions, however naive they might have seemed, but offered patient, insightful answers that revealed a keen intellect hidden beneath his unassuming exterior. Her hands, once delicate and pale, now bore the faint marks of her new life, a subtle roughening of the skin, a resilience gained from tasks she never imagined performing. She learned to mend a torn piece of tack with surprising dexterity, her slender fingers meticulously threading the needle, guided by Thomas's quiet instructions. One afternoon, a young foal fell ill, its breathing ragged and eyes clouded with distress. Eleanor, with an instinct she never knew she possessed, knelt beside the trembling creature, her hand gently stroking its soft mane. Thomas, his brow furrowed with concern, worked tirelessly, preparing a medicinal draught. There was no social divide in that moment of shared anxiety. They were simply two beings united in a common purpose, to alleviate suffering. He explained the foal's symptoms in hushed tones, his worry palpable, and she listened intently, offering quiet encouragement, her presence a silent support. As the small creature finally began to breathe more easily, resting its head against Eleanor's arm, a profound sense of shared triumph, a deep, unspoken connection passed between them. His eyes, meeting hers across the fragile form of the foal, held a warmth and gratitude that needed no words. Her red hair, falling softly around her shoulders, mingled with the foal's darker mane, a beautiful contrast of vibrant life and comforting earthiness. The stable, once a symbol of her utter humiliation, had transformed into her sanctuary, a world where authenticity was valued above all else. Here, the horses offered a purity of acceptance that society had never extended. Their gentle nuzzles in soft wickers were more comforting than any forced smile or polite conversation from her former circle. She found an unexpected freedom in her simpler garments, dresses of durable wool or sturdy cotton, often in muted greens or blues that complemented her fiery red hair. Without the confinement of corsets and the elaborate fuss of formal attire, she moved with an ease and naturalness she hadn't known she lacked. Her hair, often loosely braided or flowing freely, was no longer a meticulously constructed statement of status, but a vibrant expression of her true self, catching the sunlight as she walked the stable grounds, unburdened by critical gazes. The raw, honest labor of the stable, the visible results of their efforts, offered a satisfaction that the frivolous pursuits of her past life could never match. Thomas, in his quiet way, became her anchor, a steady presence against the lingering tide of her past trauma. He possessed a profound understanding that transcended mere words. He seemed to sense her moods, offering a comforting silence when she was pensive, or a subtle diversion if she seemed lost in thought. He would leave a particularly interesting wildflower on her small table, or point out a rare bird nesting in the rafters, small gestures that spoke volumes of his attentive spirit and his desire to bring beauty into her unassuming world. His gaze, steady and warm, met hers, And in that moment, the entire world outside their quiet sanctuary seemed to fade away. Her heart beat a rapid, unfamiliar rhythm, a surge of warmth blossoming in her chest. She saw not just the stable boy, but a man of profound sensitivity, a soul capable of truly seeing her beyond the facade of society's expectations. Her red hair felt suddenly warm against her cheeks, a blush rising despite the cool air of the room. The stark social chasm between them remained, an undeniable truth in Victorian England. Yet within the quiet confines of the stable, it seemed to blur, overshadowed by the growing connection of two souls. She was acutely aware of his touch, the accidental brush of hands, the subtle shift in proximity during a shared task, each contact sending a tremor through her. He was a constant, a rock in the shifting sands of her life, and the thought of a life without his quiet presence, without his evening tea, without his understanding gaze, began to feel utterly desolate. The memory of her former life, with its endless array of suitors and superficial flirtations, now seemed hollow, lacking the genuine depth she had found in the unspoken language of Thomas's eyes. She realized, with a startling clarity that both thrilled and terrified her, that her feelings for him ran deeper than mere gratitude or respect. It was an affection born of profound intimacy, a quiet love that had blossomed in the most improbable of places, a love that defied every rule, every expectation of the rigid society that had cast her out. The thought of this love, this forbidden connection, was both exhilarating and terrifying, a secret flame guarded fiercely within her. This realization, blossoming like a winter rose in the quiet stability of the stables, was a testament to the transformative power of genuine human connection, a profound healing that transcended all societal boundaries. The quiet sanctuary of the stables, once a haven from the judgmental eyes of society, now felt increasingly fragile, as whispers from her past subtly began to penetrate its peaceful walls. Lady Eleanor, though outwardly more serene, carried a hidden apprehension, a knowledge that her exiled status, however comfortable it had become, was merely a temporary reprieve. Her family, after months of silence, began to send terse, formal letters, inquiring about her well-being with a detached concern that felt more like a social obligation than genuine affection. These letters, sealed with the familiar family crest, felt like intrusions, unwelcome reminders of a world she had consciously, if painfully, begun to shed. She would read them by the dim light of her stable lamp, her red hair catching the faint glow, a stark contrast to the stiff, unfeeling script on the page. The polite inquiries, devoid of warmth, highlighted the profound difference in the genuine, unspoken care she received from Thomas. Her bond with Thomas had deepened into something far beyond mere respect or even friendship. It was a silent understanding, a profound connection woven from shared silences, stolen glances, and the quiet rhythm of their days. She found joy in the smallest gestures, the way his large hand would gently guide hers when teaching her to mend a bridle, the faint knowing smile that touched his lips when she correctly identified a horse's mood, or the simple comfort of his presence as they worked side by side. His dark eyes, so often calm and steady, held a warmth when they rested upon her that spoke volumes, a language only their hearts could decipher. She had begun to sketch him, secretly, capturing the strength in his profile, the quiet concentration in his gaze, the way his dark hair fell across his brow when he was absorbed in his work. These sketches, hidden deep within her journal, were precious treasures, a testament to the profound beauty she found in his unadorned presence. Her red hair, often loose and flowing as she sketched, would fall across the page, a vibrant contrast to the charcoal lines, symbolizing the vivid life he had brought back to her. One crisp winter afternoon, a grand carriage, far more elaborate than the one that had brought her to the stables, rumbled into the yard. Its polished black lacquer gleamed, its brass fittings shone, and the livery of its coachman was undeniably that of her family's crest. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart, which had known a strange peace for months, now pounded with an old, familiar dread. She quickly retreated to the shadows of a horse stall, clutching her simple woolen shawl tighter around her red hair a vibrant splash against the muted tones of the stable. The fear of confrontation, of being dragged back into the suffocating world of judgment and artifice, was palpable. Thomas, sensing her sudden tension, glanced over, his brow furrowed with concern. He saw the carriage, then saw her, hidden and trembling. Without a word, he positioned himself casually near the stall, his broad back offering a subtle shield, a quiet reassurance of his protective presence. He continued his work, meticulously polishing a bridle, but his movements were subtly slower, his attention acutely attuned to her distress. The purpose of the visit soon became clear. It was her elder brother, Lord Alastair, a man of rigid propriety and cold authority, whose very presence seemed to drain the warmth from the air. He was impeccably dressed in a heavy wool overcoat, his cravat tied with meticulous precision, his top hat held firmly in one gloved hand. His boots, polished to a mirror shine, seemed almost sacrilege on the rough stable ground. He spoke to Thomas with an air of dismissive condescension, inquiring curtly about Eleanor's health and adaptation to her new surroundings, his gaze sweeping over the stable with an obvious distaste. Thomas responded with respectful brevity, his answers concise and deferential, yet devoid of any true subservience. He met Alistair's cold gaze with an unwavering steadiness that betrayed no fear, only a quiet, unassuming dignity. Eleanor watched from the shadows, a strange mix of fear and admiration swirling within her. Her brother's elegant disdain seemed paltry next to Thomas's genuine strength. Lord Alistair's visit was not merely one of inquiry, it carried a veiled threat, a reminder of her precarious position. He spoke of future arrangements and the family's enduring reputation, words that sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. It was clear that her extended stay in the stables was beginning to inconvenience her family's social standing, a temporary solution that was now becoming a prolonged embarrassment. He hinted at her eventual return to society, albeit a carefully managed one, perhaps even a quiet, advantageous marriage arranged to erase the lingering stain of her past. The very thought filled her with revulsion. To be confined to her room was one thing. To be sold into a loveless marriage was another entirely. Her red hair, which had begun to feel like a crown of freedom, now felt like a target, drawing unwanted attention from the world that sought to reclaim her. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that her time in the stables, her precious newfound freedom, might be drawing to a close. After her brother departed, leaving a lingering scent of expensive cologne and a palpable tension in the air, Eleanor emerged from her hiding place, her face pale. Thomas was waiting, his eyes holding a silent question. She found herself, for the first time, openly sharing her fears, albeit in hushed tones and fragmented sentences. She spoke of Alistair's veiled threats, of the dreaded future arrangements, of the suffocating prospect of a forced marriage. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face, his brow furrowed with concern that was now openly expressed. He offered no false platitudes, no empty promises, but his presence alone was a profound comfort. He simply stood there, a solid, unwavering pillar of support against the storm of her anxieties. His large hand, calloused from honest labor, rested briefly and gently on her arm, a gesture of silent solidarity that spoke volumes. It was a simple touch, yet it conveyed a depth of understanding and a promise of protection that resonated deep within her soul. The unspoken knowledge of her impending removal from the stables cast a pall over their days, a quiet urgency that infused their every shared moment. She clung to the simple rituals, to the evening tea, to their shared tasks, to the comfortable silences, with a desperate intensity. She found herself studying Thomas's face, memorizing every line, every expression, every nuance of his quiet strength, as if etching his image onto her very soul. The thought of being torn away from this sanctuary, from him, felt like a return to even a deeper form of imprisonment than before. She had discovered genuine affection, true understanding, a sense of belonging in this unlikely place, and the prospect of losing it filled her with a grief more profound than any she had known after her initial disgrace. Her red hair, which had begun to feel like a crown of freedom, now felt like a target, drawing unwanted attention from the world that sought to reclaim her. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that her heart, once broken by societal scorn, now truly belonged to this quiet, dignified man, a love as unexpected as it was fierce, forged in the very place of her deepest humiliation. The next move, she knew, would determine not just her future, but the fate of this improbable, beautiful connection. The ominous cloud of Lord Alistair's visit continued to hang heavy over the stables, a constant reminder of the societal expectations that sought to reclaim Lady Eleanor. The subtle shift in the air, the increased frequency of formal notes delivered by her family's precise footmen, all signaled the tightening grip of her former world. Each rustle of paper, each distant rumble of a carriage approaching the estate gates sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She clung to Thomas's quiet presence with a desperate intensity, every shared moment now imbued with a fragile preciousness. Her red hair, once a symbol of her spirited defiance, now felt like a visible marker of her unique vulnerability, catching every stray beam of light, making her feel exposed. One frigid afternoon, as a biting wind whipped through the stable-yard, bringing with it the scent of impending snow, the crisis finally arrived. A delegation from her family, led by an imposing solicitor known for his unyielding adherence to protocol, descended upon the stables. He was accompanied by two stern-faced chaperones, women of unblemished reputation and icy demeanor, their presence a clear signal that Eleanor's prolonged isolation was at an end. They were all impeccably dressed in dark, heavy winter garments, their faces grim, their expressions utterly devoid of warmth. The solicitor, a thin-lipped man with an air of self-importance, carried a roll of parchment, its formal seal a symbol of the inescapable decree he bore. He spoke in clipped, legalistic tones, informing Eleanor that arrangements had been made for her immediate return to the family's country estate in Kent, a place even more remote and isolated than the London property. From there, her reintroduction to society, meticulously managed, would commence, culminating in a carefully considered match designed to restore the family's fractured standing. Eleanor listened, her heart plummeting with each carefully articulated word. The prospect of returning to a life of forced smiles, superficial conversations, and the crushing weight of pretense was unbearable. The thought of a marriage, a union devoid of affection, chosen solely for its social convenience, filled her with a profound despair. She glanced at Thomas, who stood silently nearby, ostensibly occupied with securing a horse, but his posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on the ground, his broad shoulders conveying a silent understanding of the crushing blow being delivered. The social chasm between them, so often forgotten in the quiet intimacy of the stables, now stretched into an unbridgeable abyss, emphasized by the formal figures in their severe winter attire. Her red hair, usually a beacon of life, seemed to dim in the stark, cold light of the confrontation. The solicitor concluded his pronouncement with a dismissive wave of his hand, indicating that Eleanor was to prepare herself for departure within the hour. The chaperones, two formidable women with tightly pinned hair and unyielding corsets, moved towards her, their expressions conveying a mixture of duty and thinly veiled disapproval. It was a moment of stark powerlessness, of being utterly overwhelmed by the relentless machinery of Victorian convention. But as one of the chaperones reached out a gloved hand to take her arm, a deep, resonant voice cut through the chilling formality of the scene. "My lady will need more time," Thomas stated, his voice calm, yet imbued with an unmistakable authority that commanded attention. His eyes, usually so gentle, held a steeliness that surprised even Eleanor. He stepped forward, placing himself subtly yet firmly between Eleanor and the approaching chaperones, his presence a formidable, silent barrier. A ripple of surprise, then outrage passed through the small delegation. The solicitor's face flushed with indignation. "Stable boy, know your place," he snapped, his voice sharp with thinly veiled contempt. "This is a private family matter." Thomas did not flinch. His gaze remained steady, fixed on the solicitor, a quiet defiance radiating from him. "My lady has endured much," he continued, his voice still low, but resonating with a quiet power that seemed to fill the cold stable air. "She requires proper rest and time to collect her few belongings. An hour is insufficient." The chaperones exchanged shocked glances, clearly unaccustomed to such directness from someone of his station. His words, though simple, were a powerful defense, a public challenge to the authority that sought to control her life. Eleanor watched, her heart swelling with an emotion so fierce it almost overwhelmed her. This was not merely the stable boy defending his charge. This was Thomas, the man who saw her, standing against the very forces that had sought to break her. Her red hair, usually framing a quiet face of composure, now seemed to pulsate with the raw intensity of her emotions. The confrontation escalated. Lord Alistair, alerted by the commotion, strode into the stable-yard, his face a mask of cold fury. "Davies, what is the meaning of this insolence? You forget yourself," he demanded, his voice a low growl. Thomas turned to face him, his stance unwavering. "My lord," he began, his voice still measured, yet imbued with a quiet power that seemed to fill the cold stable air. "Lady Eleanor is unwell. To force her departure so abruptly would be unkind. She needs more than an hour." Alistair's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking between Thomas and Eleanor, a dawning suspicion entering their cold depths. He saw the undeniable connection, the unspoken understanding that had blossomed between them, a connection that defied every rigid stricture of their class. The realization seemed to hit him like a physical blow, his face hardening with a dangerous fury. The scandal he had sought to contain now threatened to erupt in a far more scandalous fashion than he could have imagined. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Alistair, recovering his composure, fixed Thomas with a chilling stare. "You will cease this impertinence at once, Davies, or you will find yourself dismissed and permanently removed from this estate." The threat hung in the air, stark and unequivocal. It was a direct challenge, not just to Thomas's employment, but to his very presence, to the fragile haven he had helped create for Eleanor. For a moment, the stable boy's gaze hardened, a flicker of raw emotion crossing his usually serene features. But then, as his eyes met Eleanor's, a profound understanding passed between them. It was a silent conversation, a desperate plea from her for him not to sacrifice himself, and a resolute determination from him not to abandon her. He knew the risk, understood the consequence, but his gaze, when he finally turned it back to Alistair, was unwavering. "Very well, my lord," Thomas said, his voice now lower, yet imbued with a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any outburst. But Lady Eleanor will leave at dawn tomorrow, not before. She deserves at least that measure of grace. It was a concession, a retreat from outright defiance, yet it was also a victory. He had bought her time, a precious reprieve from immediate removal. Alistair, seething, but unwilling to create a public spectacle in the stable yard with his sister, reluctantly agreed, his jaw tight with suppressed rage. The solicitor and chaperones, visibly shaken by the unexpected defiance, quickly gathered their papers and departed, leaving behind a heavy silence in the stable. Eleanor felt a rush of both relief and terror. She was grateful for his intervention, but terrified of the inevitable repercussions for him. The air was thick with the scent of fear and defiance. Her red hair seemed to burn with an inner fire, matching the fierce protectiveness that had just been displayed. This was not merely a stable boy. This was a man who had chosen to stand against a powerful tide for her, revealing the true depth of his unspoken devotion.
The early light of dawn painted the stable yard in muted grays and blues as Lady Eleanor prepared for her inevitable departure. The reprieve Thomas had so bravely won for her was fleeting, a mere handful of hours that had slipped away too quickly. She moved through her small room, gathering the few belongings that held any meaning: her sketching notebook, a treasured locket containing a miniature portrait of her deceased mother, a rare, soft memory, and the simple woolen shawl that had become a comforting second skin in this humble abode. Her red hair, usually radiant even in the dim light, felt heavy, a visual representation of the burden of her fate. Every creak of the stable doors, every rustle of hay seemed to echo with the finality of her leaving this sanctuary, this place where she had found not just solace, but a nascent, forbidden love. Thomas moved with a quiet intensity, preparing the carriage that would take her away. It was a modest vehicle, certainly not the grand, ornate carriages of her former life, but sturdy and dependable. He meticulously checked the harnesses, ensuring every buckle was secure, his large hands working with a practiced, almost ritualistic precision. He avoided her gaze, his profile set in a grim line, a reflection of the unspoken agony of their impending separation. The air between them was thick with unaddressed emotion, a silent symphony of longing and despair. They both knew the implications of this parting. For Eleanor, it was a return to a gilded cage, a life devoid of genuine connection. For Thomas, it was the loss of the quiet light that had unexpectedly entered his world, the absence of the vibrant red hair that had brought an unlooked-for beauty to his days. The chasm of their social stations, temporarily bridged by shared solitude and unspoken affection, now yawned wide and threatening. As the moment of departure loomed, Eleanor found herself drawn to the comfort of the horses, running her hand along a familiar muzzle, burying her face for a moment in a warm mane. These noble creatures, simple and honest, had been her first confidants, her silent healers in the darkest hours of her disgrace. She lingered, desperate to absorb every last detail of this life she was being forced to abandon. When the time came, Thomas approached her, his steps heavy. He carried her small leather trunk, placing it carefully in the carriage. He did not speak, but his eyes, when they finally met hers, held a depth of sorrow that mirrored her own. It was a look that transcended words, a silent acknowledgement of the profound bond they had forged against all odds. Her hand, trembling slightly, reached out, and for a fleeting moment her fingers brushed against his, a silent goodbye laden with the weight of unexpressed feelings. His touch, brief but firm, conveyed a promise of unspoken devotion that settled deep within her heart. The journey to the country estate was a desolate one. The landscape blurred past the carriage window, but Eleanor saw little of it, her mind replaying the quiet moments in the stable, the warmth of Thomas's presence, the simple acts of kindness that had nourished her broken spirit. The vast, empty rooms of the new estate offered no solace. They were cold, grand prisons, echoing with the stifled laughter of a past she no longer desired. Her days returned to a familiar, yet now unbearable routine of polite calls, constrained conversations with a few carefully selected guests, and the constant pressure to conform, to erase the stain of her past. She wore the appropriate silks and satins, her red hair meticulously styled into elaborate updos by a new lady's maid, but beneath the veneer of respectability, her spirit languished. Every forced smile, every empty word felt like a betrayal of the honest affection she had left behind. The memory of Thomas, however, burned brightly within her, a secret flame that kept despair at bay. She found herself sketching in secret, not the picturesque landscapes her governess had once encouraged, but vivid scenes from the stable. The curve of a horse's neck, the play of light on a bale of hay, and always, in some hidden corner of the page, the strong, capable hands of Thomas, or the quiet dignity in his posture. These sketches were her anchors, her lifeline to a reality that felt more true than the one she was forced to inhabit. The vast, impersonal library of the estate, filled with imposing, leather-bound volumes, felt cold and uninviting compared to the worn books Thomas had quietly shared with her in the humble stable. She longed for the scent of hay, for the rhythmic sounds of the horses, for the simple, unvarnished honesty of his gaze. The relentless pressure from her family to secure a suitable match intensified. A series of gentlemen, hand-picked for their wealth and social standing, were paraded before her. They were amiable enough, perhaps, but their conversations were superficial, their gazes assessing, devoid of the genuine understanding that had blossomed in the stable. She feigned interest, offered polite smiles, but her heart remained stubbornly closed. Each suitor was a stark reminder of what she had and had not found in her life. Their polished manners and impeccable attire seemed shallow, lifeless, compared to the quiet strength and raw integrity of Thomas. She recalled how he had called her voice beautiful even when she cried, a kindness that no suitor, however eloquent, had ever offered. Her red hair, styled elaborately to attract these eligible bachelors, felt like a cage upon her head, trapping her true self. One evening, during a particularly stifling dinner party where the conversation revolved around land holdings and social alliances, Eleanor felt an overwhelming surge of rebellion. She looked around the glittering dining room, at the jewels sparkling, at the perfectly composed faces, and realized with piercing clarity that this life, however outwardly desirable, was a prison to her soul. She could not, would not, sacrifice the burgeoning truth of her heart for the sake of societal approval. The quiet love she felt for Thomas, a love forged in shared silence and profound understanding, was worth more than all the glittering titles and fortunes combined. The memory of his defiant stand against her brother, his unspoken promise of protection, resonated within her, igniting a quiet courage she hadn't known she possessed. She had been treated as a pariah, exiled, but in that exile, she had found her true self and her true heart. The thought of this love, defying every convention, was a thrilling, dangerous secret that filled her with a new, fierce resolve. Her decision was made. She would not accept a forced marriage. She would not return to a life of empty pretense. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, but she would face it with the strength she had found in the most unlikely of places. She understood that defying her family, rejecting a suitable match, meant risking further ostracization, potentially even complete disinheritance. But the alternative, a lifetime of emotional emptiness, was far more terrifying. The image of Thomas, his strong, honest gaze, his quiet dignity, filled her mind, a beacon guiding her forward. Her red hair, a fiery symbol of her spirit, felt like a crown of defiance upon her head. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant sacrificing everything society held dear. Her heart, once broken by society's scorn, now beat with a fierce, unwavering purpose, ready to fight for the love that had healed her. This newfound resolve, born from the simple, profound kindness of a stable boy, was a testament to the transformative power of genuine affection over all the artificial constructs of class and expectation.
The first light of dawn found Lady Eleanor, exhausted but resolute, approaching the familiar gates of the estate. Her simple dress was stained with dew, her boots caked with mud, and her usually vibrant red hair had escaped its braid, framing a face etched with the weariness of her arduous journey. Yet in her eyes a fierce determination burned, a stark contrast to the despair that had once shadowed them. Every aching muscle, every chilling breath of dawn was a testament to the profound choice she had made. She was no longer running from disgrace. She was running towards a future she dared to claim, a future intertwined with the quiet strength of the man who had seen her soul. She bypassed the grand entrance, heading directly towards the service gates, her heart pounding with the mixture of desperate hope and profound trepidation. What if he was gone? What if her defiance had cost him his place? The thought sent a jolt of ice through her veins, a stark reminder of the precariousness of their forbidden affection. But as she rounded the final bend in the dusty track, the familiar sight of the stables emerged from the morning mist. And there he was, Thomas. He stood by the main stable door, seemingly engrossed in preparing for the day's work, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his movements held of their usual quiet efficiency, yet Eleanor sensed a tension in his posture, an unspoken vigil. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat, unable to move. It was the simple, ordinary sight of him that broke through her resolve, melting away the fear and the miles. He looked up then, perhaps sensing her presence, or perhaps it was a culmination of his own silent longing. His eyes, the color of deep earth, widened imperceptibly, registering disbelief, then a profound, incandescent joy that transformed his usually stoic features. For a long moment, neither of them moved, simply gazing across the stable yard, the rising sun casting a golden glow around her wind-swept red hair. It was a reunion entirely devoid of words, yet overflowing with every unspoken emotion, relief, love, fear, and an unshakable sense of belonging. He then took a single, deliberate step towards her, then another, his pace quickening until he was before her, his large hands reaching out, not to touch, but to hover, as if seeking permission. Eleanor, tears finally stinging her eyes, simply nodded, a silent surrender to the profound emotion that overwhelmed her. His hands, strong and calloused, gently cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away the tracks of her tears and the grime of her journey. His touch was a balm to her weary soul, a silent promise of protection and unwavering love. He didn't speak, but his gaze, filled with an intensity that made her heart ache, communicated everything. It was a language of acceptance, of admiration, of a love so deep it defied all the rigid boundaries of their world. She leaned into his touch, her own hands rising to meet his, holding them firmly against her cheeks, grounding herself in the reality of his presence. The quiet warmth of his hands spoke volumes of the affection he held, a love that understood and treasured her beyond her social standing or reputation. Their silent reunion was unexpectedly interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horses, a group of riders, too many for a casual visit, too urgent for a mere inquiry. Dread tightened Eleanor's chest. It was her family. Thomas's head snapped up, his jaw tightening. He knew. In a swift, decisive move, he gently but firmly guided Eleanor behind a stack of hay bales, shielding her with his body as the riders thundered into the stable yard. Her brother, Lord Alistair, led the contingent, his face a mask of furious determination, his riding coat flapping in the morning breeze.
He dismounted with a swift, angry motion, his eyes immediately scanning the stable, his gaze falling upon Thomas. "Where is she? Davies, tell me where my sister is," he demanded, his voice dangerously low, his polished boots kicking up dust from the stable floor. Thomas remained impassive, his posture unyielding, his eyes meeting Alistair's cold glare with a quiet defiance. Alistair's face contorted with rage. "Do not play games with me, stable boy. I know she escaped. I know she made for this place. Produce her, or face the consequences." His hand instinctively went to the riding crop at his side, a clear threat. Eleanor, hidden behind Thomas, felt a profound terror, but also an overwhelming pride. He was protecting her, risking everything, utterly unyielding in his loyalty. Her red hair, usually so visible, was now concealed by his broad back, a physical embodiment of his safeguard. The confrontation escalated, words exchanged with increasing vehemence. Alistair threatened dismissal, imprisonment, ruin. Thomas, though he never raised his voice, remained a formidable presence, calmly denying any knowledge of Eleanor's whereabouts, his honesty radiating even in his deception. He spoke of the demanding duties of the stable, the countless horses, the early hours, subtly implying his full devotion to his work, leaving no room for clandestine activities. It was a testament to his innate integrity that even in a lie, his truth shone through. The other stable hands, loyal to Thomas, continued their work with feigned nonchalance, subtly placing themselves to obstruct Alistair's view, creating a silent blockade that protected their comrade and the lady he sheltered. The horses, sensing the tension, shifted restlessly in their stalls, their soft whinnyings adding to the tense atmosphere. After a frustrated and fruitless search, Alistair, seething with impotent rage, was forced to concede. He could not prove Eleanor was there, and Thomas's steadfast composure left him no room for accusation without direct evidence. With a final, chilling glare at Thomas, he ordered his men to search the wider estate, convinced she must be hiding elsewhere. As the thunder of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the familiar sounds of the stable, Thomas slowly turned to Eleanor. The tension in his shoulders visibly relaxed. He offered her a small, triumphant smile, a rare, genuine expression of joy that lit up his face. "You are safe, my lady," he murmured, his voice thick with relief. Eleanor, emerging from her hiding place, felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and a profound, unshakable love. She looked at him, truly seeing him as the man who had given her back her life, her spirit, her very self. "Thomas," she began, her voice hoarse with emotion, I will not return. Not to them, not to that life. I belong here, with you." Her declaration, bold and unequivocal, hung in the air between them, a promise and a plea. His eyes, dark and deep, held hers. He understood the enormity of her statement, the complete abandonment of her former world, the leap of faith she was taking. His hand, still cupping her cheek, moved gently to trace the line of her jaw, his touch conveying a tenderness that spoke volumes. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, seeking confirmation of the unspoken yearning that mirrored his own. Her beautiful red hair, once the mark of her aristocratic beauty, now framed the face of a woman who had chosen love over lineage. Then, in a profound gesture of tenderness and unwavering commitment, Thomas leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a soft, chaste kiss. It was a kiss of promise, of respect, of a love forged in the crucible of adversity. It was a solemn vow made in the quiet sanctity of the stable, witnessed only by the patient horses and the dawning sun. It was not a kiss of passion, but of absolute devotion, a sealing of their unconventional, yet utterly profound bond. When they broke apart, their eyes met again, filled with a shared understanding that transcended words, a future beginning to unfold before them, uncertain, yet bound by an unbreakable thread of affection. His voice, a low, steady murmur,
finally spoke the words she longed to hear. "Then here you shall stay, my lady, my queen." And so, Lady Eleanor, the beautiful redhead, once exiled and disgraced, found her true home not in the grand halls of aristocracy, but in the humble, honest heart of the stable. She shed the last vestiges of her former life, embracing a simpler existence alongside the man who had taught her the true meaning of dignity and love. She learned the rhythms of the stable, tending to the horses with a newfound joy, her red hair often dusted with hay, her hands capable and strong. Thomas, her protector and her dearest companion, watched over her with unwavering devotion, their affection growing deeper with each passing day. Their love, born from punishment and nurtured in silence, became a quiet defiance against a rigid world, a testament to the fact that genuine connection and profound kindness can heal even the deepest traumas and build futures where society decreed none could exist. In the quiet warmth of the stables, a love story unfolded, proving that the most precious treasures are often found where least expected, forging a happiness far richer than any title or fortune could ever provide.